Squamish Nation's educator who learned originally about the plants as a child. He'll share a bit about himself after as well, but we're very welcome to honor him coming here to share his knowledge and a bit of stories about the plants and connections with the plants. So would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So Úxwumixw, Matthew Williams Greensna, Skszwx, Tinachin Tina, Úxwumixw, Skszwx, Chenkun Tomia. So, good morning. My English name is Matthew. My ancestral name, or Quishaman, is Skszwx. That's essentially a name I use mostly during ceremonies. I'm from the Squamish Nation, and I come from the Úxwumixw village, which is in Squamish. I'm very grateful to have you here all today. And yeah, just from the quick little preview I've had of this garden, I'm pretty excited to share a bit of my knowledge with you guys. Another thing that's important for me is a lot of the knowledge that I have was gifted to me by my grandma and my auntie. Since I was literally a baby, I'd be out berry picking, fishing, out in, all my summer was spent in the forest, gathering everything. My grandma was a very powerful medicine woman. She'd be making the creams, tinctures. My dad started to pick it up, and so I'm starting to learn from him also. And so a lot of that knowledge was, orally passed down to me. And for me, that is very important, especially because traditionally, the Squamish language, we didn't have a written alphabet until 1961. So everything was orally passed down. And so a lot of the plants, that is how I think is best to learn. And yeah, so we'll start making our way over this way. This is my first little mini stop. We can obviously got our strawberries here, one of my all-time favorites to eat. But one of my personal favorites right now is the Oregon grapefruit. So Oregon grapes are absolutely amazing. For me, my current passion is I like to weave cedar bark, make baskets, hats, stuff like that. And so the one thing I'm going to be trying throughout the summer is, so as the Oregon grapes come out and the berries are ripe, I could harvest the berries, boil them, add some alum, add my cedar bark in there, and I can dye it blue color. But then also, if I harvest the roots and boil those instead of the berries, it'll actually turn into a yellow. And so that is kind of my main goal, is to do that. One of the main reasons why we would dye our cedar bark different colors is to help us with patterns. So we'd be creating diamond shapes, mountains, squares, anything like that. Because when you're making your baskets, hats, clothes, anything like that, you couldn't tell it apart during gatherings. And living as a community in our lawn houses, if someone tried stealing stuff from you, if you didn't have that pattern on there, there's no way to claim it. So every family would have a special pattern or color that they would incorporate into their either wool or cedar bark. And so that's the other thing, is also wool could be dyed with the berries and the roots. But then the other plant I really enjoy here that I wanted to talk about is the sword ferns. So the sword ferns are starting to wither and die out. They're kind of growing their new ones right now. But sword ferns were a very important starvation food. So what we would do is dig up the roots. You can find some small little rhizomes in them. Essentially think of them as a mini potato. And so because they're evergreen, we can find them any time of the year. So we'd have large ferns or fields of the sword fern. So we could dig up the roots, half of them, pick out all the rhizomes, cook them any way you would a modern day potato. And so it's a good starch food for us to have. Then we'd replant it. Then we'd come back the next year and harvest from the other side. So sword ferns are important for that reason. The other reason why sword ferns are cool is we have a traditional game called Pala Pala Pala, where it's a breathing game. So we're just trying to expand our lungs, settle our bodies. And so we teach it to our youth, where we'd pick one of the ferns, take in a big breath, and then as we're holding it, we'd cleanly pick off as many leaves as possible on one side. And then it's either a self-challenge and you try beating yourself, or see how many you get to, or you'd pass it to someone else and then challenge them and see how they're doing it. You automatically lose the game if you actually bend the stem, because the secret reason why we played this game is once all the leaves are off the stem, we would then give it to our auntie, our grandma, someone, and then they can start splitting and weave with the stem, and we'd create dip nets out of it. Sometimes if you lift up the leaves and you can find the spores underneath them, if you rub your fingers against the spores and pop them, you'll get the powder. You can then add in some water to it, and turn into a paste and put it onto your body if you have any type of minor burn. Anything that hasn't blistered, it'll help heal minor burns. Or if I know I'm going to be out paddling in a canoe, rock climbing, exposed to the sun for a really long time, I could put that on ahead of time. And essentially it's the Squamish Nation's version of a sunscreen. So the vine maple trees here are the maple trees. So they're pretty cool. So the inner bark we could take from them, make into a tea, and it helps with like coughs, menstrual cramps, measles. This is pretty much it here. So yeah, it's pretty cool. The seeds we could boil, and it's actually supposed to be a source of protein for us. And then the syrup, yeah, is edible. My work, so I work at Skszwx Center. Our chef would tap our maple trees previously, but maple trees is also one of my favorite words in the language, where it's kemle. And so if you guys notice, or if you go from like Whistler and you're making your way back, if you notice on the highway signs, it says kemle. The reason for that is kemle, the actual proper translation is paddle tree. So essentially with the wood, it's a harder wood, and so a lot of our paddles were made out of that. But where Vancouver originated, kind of near Gastown, there was lots of maple trees, and so that is where they started building it and expanding out from there. And so that is why Vancouver, on the highway signs, shows Kemle, place of maple trees. Another good example of that is Horseshoe Bay, Skszwx in the Squamish language. That before it was the ferry terminal, that inlet, it translates to boiling point. And so the reason for that is March, which is Temlothot, is time of the herring. Herring, the small silver fish, comes and lay their eggs in seaweed and kelp beds. So with that knowledge, that inlet was really amazing, where they'd go there, lay all their eggs there, and then with all the fish playing, it just looks like the water's boiling. And so we called it boiling point for that relationship. So cedar trees are one of my personal favorites to talk about. The cedar tree is called the tree of life for us just because they have so many uses. We use the wood for our like canoes, totem poles, masks, bent wood boxes, everything like that. We use the inner bark to weave hats, mats, baskets, clothes. All the cedar trees around us will most likely be red cedar. They like to be closer to the sea level, but we can also gather yellow cedar, which is higher up. So usually we have to go about halfway, 3/4 way up the mountains, and we'll start running into red cedar. So right around now, the dogwood trees have bloomed their white flowers. And so for us, that's important. That's an indicator, letting us know that the sap is starting to run down the trees. So for me, anytime I'm free or like I don't have anything going on, I'm out in the forest for the next 4 weeks because I can go out and pull the bark from the trees. This is the best time for me to do it. Some of the other uses for the cedar trees, like what I was talking about earlier, Temlothot, time of the herring, what we could also do is take a large bough of the cedar tree, bring it out to the ocean, anchor it there, leave it there for 2 weeks. If we do our timing correctly, the cedar boughs imitate the kelp beds really well, and so the herring will come and lay their eggs on the branches, and then we can pull them out, and then that's our like sustainable way of harvesting the eggs without taking too much. Some other uses we can use with the cedar tree, the branches also, instead of just using them for food, in the Squamish language we have a word Skszwx. So Skszwx translates to bath. There's 2 types of baths. This is the first, very obvious. I'm really sussum. I need to jump in the river and clean myself off. But there's also a more spiritual one. If I'm very heavy-hearted, really angry, really sad, anything like that, and I want to center myself, I would wake up Sďwx, which is before sunrise. Hike up a mountain, get as high as I can, and make sure that mountain has a glacial river. During that time, I would strip off all my clothes, grab a cedar bough, walk into the middle of the river, and start brushing myself off head to toe with that bough. As I'm doing that, I'm imagining all that negative or bad energy getting brushed off my body. Then I dunk myself up to my neck 3 times as I'm doing that. And once I'm fully brushed off and done, and I think all that energy is gone away from me, I'll fully submerge into the water, come out, throw the cedar out, and just watch it float away. So that's all my bad energy. If you can find a cedar tree where a majority of the branches like this one curl up, that lets me know this is a male cedar tree. If you find a cedar tree where a majority of the branches curl down at the end, that is a female cedar tree. So the reason why we needed to know that is, one, obviously we believe every plant, animal, tree has a spirit. And so with that, traditionally all the boys would be paddling in a male canoe. All the girls would be in a female canoe. If I hopped into a female canoe and started paddling, that spirit of the canoe would notice me in them, get mad, and would try to capsize me whenever they had the chance throughout that journey. It's a lot more rare, but if you can find a cedar tree where they curl both down and up in an even amount, that is then on a Sḳwx or a two-spirit. So two-spirited trees were very rare and sacred to find, but if we could find one, they're really amazing for youth training canoes, but also for long-distance ocean-going journeys. Being two-spirit, it doesn't mind whoever's in them, and that's very important for like a long-distance ocean-going journey, say like a trading route. Did you guys know our trading routes went from like Vancouver, we could go down to California, or up to Alaska, and we even had trading ties with Hawaii. So we got a little bit of plantain here. Plantain is one of my favorites. A lot of people think of them as weeds, but plantain, one, is edible. You can eat them and it tastes very close to like a spinach. I remember the translation is little bed of the frog. And so for me, I just absolutely love that. But so plantain is really good as a band-aid. So if you get like a bug bite, bee sting, rub up against stinging nettle, anything like that, or anything kind of bad, you would take the plantain, chew it, then put it on wherever you've gotten bitten or stung, and it'll like reduce the swelling, pull any of that bad bacteria out of your body. I've heard stories where Skszwx, she's an amazing ethnobotanist. She was out way out in the forest with a group, and someone got stung and she was allergic, and so she rushed around, found some plantain, put it on there. It helped suck out some of the poison, and so she ended up surviving because she didn't have her like her EpiPen, so like it helped her out until she got to safety. So plantain for me is really cool, and so I always like it when I get to see them. Okay, another personal favorite of mine is the wild ginger that we have here. So wild ginger for me, one, it needs like a lot of foliage, so it's pretty hard to find in the forest. It stays more surface level, it doesn't go deep into the ground, but it's pretty easy to identify. You can see it's like pretty fuzzy stems, and then like if you like break it up, you can like smell it, and it's really strong, pretty close to a ginger. It gives you a nice little kick. So it'll warm you up a bit. I like to add it into stir fries, anything like that. I've heard you could take it if you're out like backcountry and you find some, maybe you didn't bring a deodorant, you get a bit smelly, you can use it as a quick little backup, just to get rid of the smell. Okay, bonus info. I found wild ginger on my cards. And so the roots we could also use as a tea. It helps with upset tummies, cramps, indigestion, and then, yeah. But here we've got some strawberries. Strawberries, one of my all-time favorites to eat. A little bit waxy, but similar to the Oregon grape. I could harvest the berries, boil them, and I turn my cedar bark a blackish purple, which is really sweet. And so I like to use that as one of my main kind of dyes, and I just love gathering. I've got a few secret patches in Squamish I like to use, and so yeah. So into this info here, and I'm also more than welcome to show you guys these cards later on. But so strawberries, the leaves we can use for teas and tinctures. It helps with coughs, heartburn, bladder infections, stomach, or like stomach ulcers, and menstrual cramps. So it's a pretty big wooden plant already. The leaves could also help treat wounds, burns, and sores. And the berries are just, yeah, they're just like superfood, good and high in antibodies. And so, yeah. Strawberries, one of my all-time favorites to have. If you haven't seen them before, like, we can pass this one around just so you can kind of see what they look like. And it's like late in the summer, so usually around August is when I'll start heading out into the forest and gathering them. Yeah, so trailing blackberry, I didn't want to talk about the Himalayan ones over there because they're invasive, like they take over everywhere, but trailing blackberry is absolutely amazing. The leaf in the teas can be used as a tonic. It helps with, bowel movements. I don't even know how big that word is, but the berries, high in antibodies, it's also used to help treat cancer. Diarrhea, whooping cough, colitis, toothaches, anemia, sore throats, mouth ulcers, hemorrhoids, minor bleedings. So like berries are pretty sweet. The stems we could also use for like urinary infections, and then this is the one I want to try soon, but the inner bark we can boil and use as another yellow dye. So snowberries is the name for them. They're also nicknamed ghostberries, just because they are poisonous. You don't want to eat them. You could take the berries, squish them. It helps heal more severe burns, stuff that is blistered. It'll help heal with that. A lot of the elders would take the berries, squish them, put it on their feet or kind of wherever, because it also helps with nerve damage. So essentially, like, it won't heal, but it'll give you like a tingling sensation and give you back a bit of movement. And yeah, so it's good, for burns, nerve damage, also like warts, anything topical, like stuff like that. It'll help get rid of them. And then I'm just learning now, the roots and stems could also be used for stomach alignments. Thimbleberries are one of my all-time favorite summer berries. They're cousins to a raspberry. Let me see if I can find the card with them. They're really tasty. I like them. They're pretty low in juices. I love fruit roll-ups, and I found out that traditionally we would take the thimbleberries, crush them up. They've got good pectin levels, and so you could then mix in like your raspberries, your blueberries, whatever you want to change the like flavor profile of. Mix in with the thimbleberries, leave it out in the sun, dehydrate them, and let them dry, and it'll turn into fruit leather. It's a very chewy fruit leather. Usually we'd have to soak it for like 4 to 6 hours ahead of time. So you'd like soak it overnight to make it edible. But it was a good way for us to preserve our foods, especially back hundreds to thousands of years ago. Sometimes on the stems, you'll see these really big bumps on them. And that lets me know of a very important animal that is nearby. And that animal is hornets. So if you see a big lump on the thimbleberries, it's not a symbiotic relationship. I don't know why the hornets do it, but they essentially inject and lay their eggs in the stem of a thimbleberry and they incubate throughout the winter time, and then they'll hatch early spring. So I see them all the time at work. The leaves we can use for teas. Also, traditionally we do like steam cooking. And so if you can find the young shoots that are starting to grow, that is called a Skszwx. So the young shoots are edible, and so the thimbleberry and also the salmonberry shoots, those are the one of 3 fresh plants to grow after winter. And so it's just a nice fresh green for us to have. You would pull the stem, you want to peel off the bark from it, and then eat the center, and it's pretty much like a celery. Takaame, and so it translates nowadays to thimbleberry, but the actual translation is lionberry. But yeah, it's also good for like vitamin C, intestinal issues. The leaves we could also use externally for acne, skin irritation, burns. If we boil and make the tea, it's also good for diarrhea. So elderberries here is one of my new favorite berries that I've been learning lots of info about. So elderberries at this stage, it might be a little bit too late, but essentially we could take the flowers and do a cordial. So cordial with them. So make a tea, which is pretty sweet. We do have to be careful though, because I've heard the stem and the leaves are poisonous, so you just only want the flowers. The flowers will turn into berries, and we can, my dad makes a syrup out of it, and it's like me and my family, we drink it all the time. It helps build up our immune systems, helps like cut off colds. The stem, the center, the pith is very soft. So what we would do for our arrowheads, knives, spears, we could take the stems, hollow it out, and essentially create sheaths. I think the Stolo Nation, one of my favorite things that they did is not only would they play keep up, but then they would start like they turn into a memory game also, where then they would have to say like an animal part. Like they would name off different salmon parts until either someone doubled up a name or they dropped it. And so, like, yeah, that's some of my favorite uses with the elderberries.
But the leaves and the cambium layer on the plant itself is good for arthritis. You take the leaves, the cambium layer, put it into hot water for 10 minutes, then you add it to your bath, and that'll help relieve your arthritis. It won't cure it, but it'll relieve it. The spruce tips, when they're really bright green, you take it, you can make a tea out of it. But when we talked to Chef Wade about it, instead of making a tea out of it, he infused milk with it. Then he turned the milk into ice cream, and that is the best spruce tip ice cream I've ever had.
We got to give that a try soon.
Yep.
And of course, I found the card of it, so we get bonus info. So yeah, eating it helps with inflammation, strengthens the immune system. It's like antibacterial, contains vitamin A, potassium, C, magnesium. So it's pretty sweet. And yeah, so tea, or I guess now ice cream that I've learned, helps with like sore throats and coughs. And then you can also make a cream out of it, and it helps with like rash burns and bites. Raw, it's usually, I would find it's like a bit sour or bitter when I've had them.